My name is Sandra Whitlow, and at 38, I learned exactly what my marriage thought I was worth. It happened at our own dinner table, no audience, just the two of us and a plate of cold chicken. My husband Tony set down his fork, looked at me like he was settling a debt, and told me I should be grateful he hadn't left already. What he didn't know is that 3 weeks earlier, I had already sat across from a family law attorney with a folder of documents that would end his version of our marriage for good. For 2 years before that dinner, I had been quietly building a paper trail of every single thing he did to me. The kind of trail that doesn't change its story no matter how many times a man rehearses his. He thought he still held the leash. He had no idea I'd already cut it and kept the rope. Let me back up to the woman my husband thought he was talking to that night. I work as a medical billing coordinator, which matters later, so keep that in mind. I spend my days reading insurance denials, appeals, claim codes, the language insurance companies use when they want to say no without admitting it. I know how to request a record. I know who has to answer when you ask the right way. Tony used to joke that my job was boring, that I spent all day chasing paperwork nobody cared about. He never once considered that the woman who chases paperwork for a living might eventually chase some of her own. I married Tony when I was 29. He was attentive in the beginning, the kind of attentive that feels like winning something. He remembered my coffee order. He showed up with soup when I was sick and sat on the floor next to the couch just to be near me. I told my sister Renata I'd never met a man who paid attention like that. I believed, for longer than I'd like to admit, that the man at the beginning was the real one, and the other version, the one who slowly arrived later, was some temporary weather that would pass if I was patient enough. It didn't pass. It just got quieter and more permanent. By year 4, he had a way of correcting small details about my own life in front of other people. What year something happened, how a story actually went. Small enough each time that arguing made me look unstable, which was, I think, exactly the point. By year 5, I'd stopped calling Renata back the same day because every call home eventually got mentioned at dinner and turned into evidence of something. By year 6, I was rearranging my own schedule around his moods before he even asked, the way you learn to duck before you're told to duck. My coworkers started asking, carefully, if everything was all right at home. I told them it was fine. I believe myself when I said it, which is the part that still unsettles me more than anything Tony ever did. I want to stop here for a second, because I know some of you watching this have a version of that sentence sitting somewhere in your own chest. I told them it was fine, and I believe myself. If that's you, write it down somewhere, not for anyone else, just so the next time someone tells you you're imagining things, you have something on paper that remembers it the way it actually happened. Comment the word noticed if you're out there. Here's the story Tony would have told you if you'd asked him before that dinner. A good marriage, a devoted husband, a wife who was, if anything, a little too sensitive, a little too quick to take things personally. That was the official record, the one he repeated at family dinners, and to his mother, and eventually to a man at his gym he barely knew. It was clean. It was consistent. And it had exactly one flaw, which is that it required me to keep agreeing with it. For 2 years, I let him believe I had stopped noticing. It's remarkable what people will say in front of you once they're sure you've stopped listening. The turn came on an ordinary Tuesday in March, 9 hours into a shift, sitting in my car in the hospital parking garage with the engine off. I didn't want to drive home. Not tired, not stressed, just unwilling. The way your body sometimes knows something before your mind agrees to say it out loud. I sat there long enough that the garage lights buzzed and clicked off around me, motion censored, leaving me in the dark like the building itself had finally noticed I wasn't moving forward either. That same week, the thing happened that actually started the clock. Tony called me at work, not home, which he almost never did, and mentioned, casual as weather, that he'd run into an old coworker's husband at the gym and set the record straight about a few things, meaning he'd told a stranger I exaggerate, that I'm not the most reliable narrator of my own life. He'd been quietly distributing a softer, sadder version of himself to people connected to my job, payback for correcting him about interest rates at a dinner party in front of his brother 3 weeks earlier. I was standing in a supply closet, the only private room on my floor, 2 full minutes after that call, just breathing, because I needed somewhere to feel the thing before I had to walk back out and be calm for a room full of people who needed me functional. I didn't cry. I didn't call him back. I drove home that night, sat at my kitchen table, and opened my laptop, and the question in my head had changed completely. It wasn't, is something wrong here anymore? It was, he is rewriting who I am to the people around me, and he doesn't think he needs my permission. The next morning, before I even clocked in, I called a lawyer. Her name was Patricia Adam, and her office was direct in a way that felt almost foreign after years of being managed and handled. She pulled out a legal pad and made me list every account, every line of credit, every year my name had or hadn't been attached to something. And watching 8 years of my life get written down in plain handwriting made it look smaller and more countable than it had ever felt living inside it. She asked if anything had gone beyond words. I said no. The way she asked told me she expected that question to come back around eventually, and that sat with me longer than anything Tony had ever said at a dinner table. Before I left, she told me something I didn't understand the full weight of until much later. "Whatever you decide to do with this information," she said, "the most important thing is that you have it before he knows you have it." I told no one. Not my mother, not Renata, not my best friend Colette, who had known every secret I'd had since we were 19. I told no one, because 8 years with Tony had taught me exactly one useful thing. Information was currency to him, and he always needed to hold more of it than I did. For once in our marriage, I was going to be the one holding more. It took 3 weeks for the folder to grow into something real. Patricia helped me request our full financial history, every joint account statement going back 5 years, every line where his income had quietly dropped, and mine had quietly carried us both without either of us ever saying it out loud. I requested it the way I request a denied claim at work: calm, specific, impossible to brush off. And buried inside 3 years of statements, I found the second thing, the thing that turned a separation into something closer to a reckoning, a recurring transfer, monthly, modest enough to hide in plain sight, routed to an account that wasn't ours. Not alimony, not a bill, not anything either of us had ever discussed. Just a number that left every month and never came home. I sat at my kitchen table at midnight with 3 years of bank statements spread out like a crime scene that had been quietly unfolding the entire time I thought I was simply being managed and corrected. I picked up my pen and wrote a new request, this time for the account number itself, the one routing those transfers, because a number on a statement doesn't argue with you the way a husband does. Getting a bank to release that information isn't like requesting a denied claim. There are privacy rules, custodians, forms that have to land on exactly the right desk or sit in a queue for a month. I knew all of this. It's the one place Tony's low opinion of my job had it backwards. He thought my work made me small and bored. My work made me patient and exact is precisely what you need to pull a single thread out of a system built to make people give up asking. While I waited on that request, I drove out one evening to see Colette, who had mentioned once, years earlier, that her cousin worked dispatch for the same gym Tony went to. I didn't lead her. I just asked, over coffee, what she remembered about her cousin mentioning a man complaining about his wife that spring. Colette stirred her coffee for a long time. "He told my cousin's husband some things," she finally said. "I remember thinking it didn't sit right the way he said it. Too smooth, like he'd practiced it." I thanked her and drove home, and that night I didn't sit with my hands on the steering wheel turning a memory over and over. The memory was turning me over instead. Patricia called 11 days later. The transfers had a name attached, a woman named Kimberly, someone Tony had described to his own mother months earlier as just a coworker. In a phone call, his mother had apparently mentioned to no one until everything else started coming apart and people started talking. The amount wasn't enormous. That was almost the worst part. He hadn't even thought it was significant enough to hide carefully. He thought I would never look. My mother-in-law found me a week after the documents went out, the first time she had ever shown up at my apartment unannounced in 8 years. She didn't sit. "You're going through his accounts," she said, which meant the town, such as it was, had leaked. I didn't deny it. I asked her why that bothered her so much if there was nothing to find. That's when the real reason finally surfaced, underneath all the talk about marriage and grace and giving him time. "Do you have any idea what this would do to him at work?" she said, her voice low and fast. "He's up for partner next quarter. You drag his personal life into something public and it's gone. Everything he's built. For what, Sandra? For a feeling?" So that was it. Not concern for either of us. A partnership. My mother-in-law looked at me like I was a liability on a balance sheet, and she said the family line one more time, except now I could hear exactly what it had always meant. Let it go for the family had only ever meant let it go for his career. He'd never once said it about us, because there had never really been an us to protect. "Okay," I told her, and I closed the door, and I called Patricia and told her to move everything forward. All of it, the financial discovery, the gym conversation in writing, every dated note I'd kept for 2 years. He found out about the lawyer the way he found out about everything in the end. Paperwork addressed to him, sitting on the kitchen counter where he couldn't pretend not to see it. He called me 7 times that afternoon. He came home that night like a stranger wearing a familiar face, cycling through charm, then logic, then anger, then a grief that arrived about 3 years too late to mean anything at all. He got down on one knee in the kitchen, the same knee he'd used to propose, and I remember thinking how strange it was that the same gesture could carry such different weight 8 years apart. And then he stood back up, his voice gone cold in about 2 seconds, and told me that if I went through with this, he'd make sure everyone at my office knew exactly what kind of woman walks out on a good man. That he'd already started, actually, with the gym, and people believe the first version of a story they hear. I let him finish. Because here is what Tony never understood about the quiet woman across that table. Quiet was never the same as not paying attention. "I know about Kimberly," I said. "I have the transfers, I have the dates, and I have a witness who heard exactly what you told a stranger about me at the gym 3 weeks before any of this started." I watched something move across his face for the first time in 8 years. Not anger, recognition. The realization that I had been 3 steps ahead of him the entire time, and he had simply never once checked. Mediation lasted close to a year. He cried on cue more than once, timed for effect, and I felt almost nothing watching it, because I had already grieved this marriage alone, in a parking garage, months before he found out anything was wrong. In month 4, his attorney had him trying to frame everything as mutual, amicable, growing apart. The soft language men use when they want credit for a decision they didn't make. Patricia let him finish every word of it. Then she slid 2 documents across the table without comment. The bank records, the written statement about the gym. He went quiet in a way I had never once heard in 8 years of marriage. Not sulking, not building his comeback. Actually quiet. The sound of a man realizing the room held more information than he'd accounted for. His attorney called a recess. Nobody used the word amicable again for the rest of the case. I'm 38 now. I have an apartment with plants on a windowsill that catches the morning light, chosen by me, answerable to no one. I have a savings account with only my name on it and numbers I tracked myself and never have to explain to anyone again. I still do the same job, reading denials, filing appeals, learning what people are entitled to, and helping them ask for it the right way. I think about that a lot. How much of my work is teaching people that the records of their own lives belong to them, whether or not someone else already decided the story was closed? Tony believed, right up until the documents hit that kitchen counter, that I was the one who couldn't survive without him. He built 8 years on that belief, and it never once cracked because I had confirmed it so reliably for so long. He never once asked what my silence actually meant. That was his real mistake, not the cruelty, not even Kimberly, the not asking. He stopped being curious about me so completely that he never noticed the exact week I started getting curious about myself, and he never imagined that the same quiet he relied on to manage me was the same quiet that let me gather everything I needed to leave him with nothing left to threaten me with. He just hadn't gotten the paperwork yet, and by the time he did, the grateful, quiet woman he thought he'd spent 8 years managing had already finished doing the only thing that mattered. I'd learned exactly what I was worth, written it down, and waited for him to hand me the moment to use it. He gave me that moment himself at our own dinner table, with a fork going down and a sentence he thought would end something. It did end something, just not what he expected.